Hey guys, tonight we are drifting away from the hustle and bustle of the modern world, back in time to a city built on water, a vibrant metropolis sustained by one of the most ingenious and beautiful agricultural systems ever devised. We're journeying to the heart of the Aztec Empire, to the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan, and we're going to explore the calm, almost meditative cultivation methods of the Chinampas, the famous floating gardens. Imagine yourself gliding in a canoe through a labyrinth of shimmering canals flanked on either side by incredibly fertile, man-made islands, bursting with vibrant green crops and colorful flowers. The air is fresh, filled with the scent of damp earth, blooming blossoms, and the distant murmur of a great city. This isn't just farming, it's an art form, a harmonious dance with nature that fed an empire. And honestly, if you were suddenly tasked with building one of these Chinampas from scratch, using only ancient Aztec tools and your modern-day upper body strength, you probably wouldn't survive the first afternoon without needing a very long nap and possibly a stiff drink of fermented agave juice. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, maybe drop a comment to let us know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always wonderful to feel our global community of history enthusiasts and curious minds connecting. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself at the edge of a vast, shimmering lake, Lake Texcoco, in the high valley of Mexico, sometime in the late 15th or early 16th century. Before you rises the magnificent Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, a city of towering pyramids, bustling marketplaces, and wide causeways, all seemingly floating on the water's surface. It's a breathtaking sight, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. But tonight, our focus isn't on the grand temples or the fierce warriors. It's on the quieter, greener arteries of this incredible city. The intricate network of canals and the astonishingly productive agricultural marvels known as Chinampas. These weren't truly floating gardens in the sense of being unmoored rafts, but rather artificial islands, meticulously constructed rectangular plots of fertile land built up from the shallow lake beds. They were in essence raised fields crisscrossed by canals that provided constant moisture and a means of transportation. The very site of this system is one of serene order and vibrant life. Picture yourself in a shallow canoe, your paddle dipping silently into the calm water of a narrow canal. On either side, the Chinampas rise lush with rows of maize beans, squash tomatoes, chilies, and a dazzling array of flowers, particularly marigolds, so beloved by the Aztecs. The air is cool and moist, a welcome respite from the sometimes harsh sun of the high valley. You hear the gentle lapping of water against the sides of your canoe, the distant song of water birds, perhaps the quiet hum of insects, and the soft sounds of a chinampero, a Chinampa farmer, tending his crops with unhurried, practiced movements. This is a world away from the monumental grandeur of the city center. This is the gentle, beating heart of its sustenance. The beauty of the Chinampa system lies not just in its productivity, which was legendary, but in its sustainability and its harmonious integration with the natural environment. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Chinampa agricultural system, developed extensively by the Aztecs in the lakes of the Valley of Mexico, was a highly intensive and sustainable form of wetland cultivation, capable of producing multiple harvests per year and supporting the large population of Tenochtitlan. It was a closed-loop system, where nutrient-rich mud from the canal bottoms was used to fertilize the plots, and the canals themselves provided irrigation and facilitated the transport of goods. This wasn't slash-and-burn agriculture quickly exhausting the land. This was a patient, continuous cultivation, a partnership with the water and the earth. The Chinampas were in many ways a perfect solution to the geographical challenges faced by the Aztecs, who built their capital on a swampy island in a large, shallow lake system. Land was scarce, but water was abundant, so they literally made new land fertile and perfectly irrigated. Historians still argue about the precise scale and total agricultural output of the Chinampa system in its heyday, and how much of Tenochtitlan's food supply it provided versus tribute from conquered territories. However, there's no doubt that it was a cornerstone of the Aztec economy and a marvel of pre-Columbian engineering. It was a system that required immense knowledge of local ecology, hydrology, and agronomy passed down through generations. It was in essence a form of hydroponics, but on a grand, beautifully organic scale long before the term was ever coined. And it was all done with calm, meticulous care, a gentle art of cultivation that transformed a watery marshland into one of the most productive agricultural landscapes in the ancient world. The very pulse of these floating gardens was one of quiet, persistent, life-giving abundance. You're now gliding gently in your canoe the serene, fertile Chinampas Tratamento Portuguese for treatment, or handling, which isn't quite right here. Let's say flanking you on either side a testament to Aztec ingenuity. The gentle pulse of these man-made islands teeming with life is a stark contrast to the often turbulent history of the empire they fed. To truly appreciate the calm genius behind the Chinampa system, you need to understand the unique and often challenging watery world of the Valley of Mexico, the cradle of Aztec civilization. This was a landscape that didn't just invite, but practically demanded innovative solutions for survival and prosperity. Imagine yourself standing on a high point overlooking the Valley of Mexico before the massive urban sprawl of modern Mexico City sometime around the 14th or 15th century. What you see is a vast enclosed basin, a high-altitude plateau ringed by towering volcanic mountains. And at its heart, not a single unified body of water, but a complex system of 5 interconnected shallow lakes. Zampango and Saltocan to North, Texcoco in the center, the largest and most saline, and Xochimilco and Chalco to the south, which were freshwater. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Aztec capital. Tenochtitlan was founded on an island in Lake Texcoco, within a larger system of interconnected shallow lakes in the Valley of Mexico, an environment that presented both challenges and unique opportunities for agriculture and urban development. This lacustrine or lake-based environment was the defining feature of the region. The lakes were fed by mountain runoff and underground springs, but they were also subject to seasonal fluctuations in water level, and in the case of Lake Texcoco, significant salinity, particularly in its northern and central parts. The areas around the lake shores were often marshy, swampy, and prone to flooding. It wasn't exactly prime, ready-to-plow agricultural land in the conventional sense. You couldn't just clear a forest and plant your maize fields like in some other regions. If you tried that in many parts of the valley, your crops would either drown in the wet season or wither in salty soil. It was the kind of place that might make a less resourceful group of people say, you know what, let's just keep migrating. This looks like a lot of hard work for very damp feet. But the Aztecs, or the Mexica as they called themselves, were nothing if not resourceful. Arriving in the Valley of Mexico as relative latecomers, a nomadic Chichimec tribe, they found the most fertile land already occupied by other established city-states. According to their own legends, their patron god Huitzilopochtli guided them to found their capital Tenochtitlan on a rather unpromising swampy island in Lake Texcoco, a place where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a serpent, the very image that now adorns the Mexican flag. It was a challenging spot to say the least. Building a major city, let alone feeding its growing population, in such a watery, unstable environment required extraordinary engineering and agricultural innovation. This is where the brilliance of the Chinampa system comes into sharp focus. The shallow, marshy lakebeds of Xochimilco and Chalco, with their freshwater springs and abundant aquatic vegetation, provided the perfect conditions for this unique form of raised field agriculture. Instead of seeing the water as an obstacle, the Aztecs and the peoples before them, who developed earlier forms of Chinampas, saw it as an opportunity. The water provided constant irrigation. The lakebed mud was incredibly fertile, and the network of canals that would inevitably form between the Chinampas offered a convenient means of transportation for people and produce. It was a case of turning a perceived disadvantage into a remarkable advantage. They didn't fight the water, they partnered with it. There's a quirky little tidbit that suggests the very air quality around the Chinampa zones might have been perceived as healthier or more pleasant than in other parts of the valley. The abundance of vegetation, the constant moisture, and the cooling effect of the water could have created a more temperate and perhaps less dusty microclimate, a welcome relief during the dry season. Early Spanish chroniclers often marveled at the beauty and fertility of the Chinampa zones, describing them as veritable floating paradises filled with flowers and abundant crops. It was probably the ancient equivalent of having a really good air purifier and a humidifier running 24/7, but all natural and much prettier. Historians still argue about the full geographical extent of the Chinampa system at its peak, and precisely how much of the Aztec capital's food supply it was responsible for. Some suggest it was incredibly widespread, covering vast areas of the southern lakes and providing the bulk of Tenochtitlan's fresh produce. Others believe that while highly productive, its geographical limitations meant that tribute from conquered provinces still played a more significant role in feeding the imperial core. What is undeniable is that the Chinampas were a vital and highly efficient component of the Aztec agricultural economy, a testament to their deep understanding of their unique lacustrine environment. This watery world with its shimmering lakes, its reed-fringed marshes, and its ring of protective mountains was not just a physical setting for the Aztecs. It was a sacred landscape imbued with mythological meaning and home to various water deities. The very act of creating land from water, of coaxing abundance from the shallows, must have felt like a continuous act of co-creation with those gods, a harmonious participation in the cycles of nature. The calm cultivation methods of the Chinampas were a reflection of this deep connection to their unique water-shaped world. You're now gazing across the vast, shimmering lake system of the Valley of Mexico, understanding how this unique watery environment set the stage for the Aztecs' ingenious agricultural solution, the Chinampa. But while the Aztecs are rightly famous for expanding and perfecting this system to feed their magnificent capital, Tenochtitlan, it's important to remember that they weren't the first to dream up the idea of creating fertile islands in shallow waters. Like many great innovations in history, the Chinampa system had deeper, more ancient roots, with its origins likely stretching back centuries before the Aztecs rose to prominence. The Aztecs, with their characteristic drive and organizational skill, took this existing technology and elevated it to an art form, a true cornerstone of their empire. The story of Chinampa agriculture likely begins with earlier Mesoamerican cultures who inhabited the lake-rich regions of central Mexico. Archaeological and paleoecological evidence suggests that forms of wetland agriculture, including raised fields and small artificial islands, were being practiced in areas like Lake Chalco and Xochimilco as far back as the Middle Formative period around 1000 BCE to 400 BC, or certainly by the Classic periods, 200-900 CE, contemporaneous with great civilizations like Teotihuacan. This is a mainstream historical fact. The agricultural technique of Chinampa construction predates the Aztec Empire, with evidence suggesting earlier forms were utilized by cultures such as those centered around Teotihuacan, or in the Xochimilco-Chalco Basin, centuries before the Aztecs established Tenochtitlan. These earlier systems might have been smaller in scale, perhaps less systematically organized, but they laid the foundational knowledge for what was to come. Imagine these earlier lakeside communities, perhaps small villages or towns, observing the natural process of sedimentation and vegetation growth in the shallow, marshy areas. They might have noticed how floating mats of reeds and water hyacinths could trap silt and eventually form small semi-solid islands. Or they might have begun by simply piling up mud and aquatic plants in shallow areas to create slightly raised planting beds that were less prone to flooding. It was likely a gradual process of observation, experimentation, and refinement, a slow coevolution between human ingenuity and the natural tendencies of the lacustrine environment. They were learning to garden with the water, not just beside it. As populations grew and the demand for arable land increased, these early techniques would have become more sophisticated. The advantages were clear. The lakebed mud was incredibly fertile, rich in organic matter and nutrients. The surrounding water provided constant natural irrigation, eliminating the need for complex canal systems fed from distant rivers, though canals between Chinampas became key. And the water also offered a degree of protection from frost, as large bodies of water tend to moderate local temperatures. It was a recipe for agricultural success if you could master the art of building and maintaining these artificial plots. You could almost say these early farmers were the original lakefront property developers, but instead of condos, they were building super fertile vegetable patches. When the Aztecs or Mexica arrived in the Valley of Mexico in the 13th and early 14th centuries, as a relatively humble nomadic group, they found the most desirable lands already occupied by more powerful city-states. Forced to settle on that rather unpromising swampy island in Lake Texcoco, they needed a way to feed themselves and establish a secure agricultural base. It is here that their genius for organization and adaptation truly shone. They didn't invent Chinampas from scratch, but they recognized the immense potential of this existing wetland farming technique, particularly in the freshwater southern lakes of Xochimilco and Chalco. They adopted it, expanded it, and systemized it on an unprecedented scale, transforming vast areas of shallow lake and marsh into a highly productive agricultural heartland. There's a quirky little tidbit that some scholars suggest the very name Aztec might derive from Aztlan, their mythical place of origin, which is often described in legends as an island in a lake. If true, their eventual settling on an island in Lake Texcoco and their mastery of creating artificial islands, Chinampas would be a rather neat, almost poetic echo of their ancestral homeland. It's like they were destined to become masters of watery domains, pre-programmed for amphibious living and lake-based agriculture. The Aztecs applied their renowned organizational skills to Chinampa construction and management. They likely standardized sizes and layouts, developed efficient methods for dredging canals and applying fresh mud, and perhaps even implemented systems for crop rotation and pest control specifically adapted to the Chinampa environment. Under Aztec rule, the Chinampa zones became a crucial source of food. Maize beans, squash chilies, tomatoes, amaranth, and a vast array of flowers, which were highly valued for ceremonial and decorative purposes, not just for the local farmers, but for the burgeoning population of the imperial capital, Tenochtitlan. Historians still argue about the precise level of technological innovation the Aztecs themselves brought to Chinampa farming versus what they inherited from earlier cultures like those of Xochimilco, Culhuacan, or even the Toltecs. Was it a case of brilliant adoption and scaling up? Or did the Aztecs also introduce significant new techniques in construction water management, or crop cultivation that made their Chinampas uniquely productive? It's likely a combination. The Aztecs were master borrowers and refiners of existing Mesoamerican technologies and cultural practices, and they certainly had the centralized power and manpower to implement large-scale agricultural projects. So, as you glide through those serene Chinampa canals in your mind, remember that you are witnessing the culmination of centuries, perhaps even millennia, of accumulated wisdom and patient adaptation to a unique environment. The Aztecs may have been the ones to create the vast floating metropolis of Tenochtitlan, but the seeds of its agricultural sustenance, the ancient roots of its blooming Chinampa gardens, were planted long before their eagle landed on that cactus. You are now well aware that the stunningly productive Chinampa system of the Aztecs was not a sudden invention, but the culmination of centuries of wetland agricultural knowledge inherited and then masterfully expanded. You understand the watery world of the Valley of Mexico that necessitated such ingenuity. So let's get our hands a little dirty, metaphorically speaking, and explore the calm, meticulous, almost artistic process by which an Aztec Chinampero, or Chinampa farmer, would actually construct one of these fertile, man-made islands. This wasn't a quick job of simply piling up some mud. It was a careful, layered act of creation, weaving together the very fabric of the lake to make new land. Imagine you are at the edge of a shallow, marshy section of Lake Xochimilco, or Lake Chalco, the freshwater heartland of Chinampa agriculture. The first step in building a new Chinampa would be to define its boundaries. This was typically done by driving long, sturdy wooden stakes or posts, often from willow ahuejote trees, which we'll talk more about later, deep into the lake bed. These stakes would outline a rectangular plot, the future garden bed usually oriented to take advantage of sunlight and water flow. The size could vary, but a common Chinampa might be anywhere from 2 to 10 meters wide. That's roughly 6 to 33 feet and perhaps 20 to 100 meters long, around 65 to over 300 feet or even longer in some cases. They were essentially long, narrow islands, designed for easy access from canoes along their sides. It was like marking out your dream vegetable patch, but instead of string and pegs on dry land, you're using hefty poles in a decidedly squishy lake bottom. Once the perimeter was established, the real construction began. The foundation of the Chinampa was often made by weaving together a sturdy mat of reeds, rushes, and other aquatic vegetation, much like creating a giant, incredibly resilient basket base. This woven frame, called a cimiento, would be laid down within the staked-out area on the lake bed. This is a mainstream historical fact. The construction of an Aztec Chinampa typically began with creating a rectangular enclosure in the shallow lake bed using stakes and wattle interwoven reeds, reeds, or branches, which was then filled with alternating layers of aquatic vegetation, dredged mud and earth to build up the raised garden bed above the water level. Then came the layering, the calm, patient building up of the island. The Chinampero would gather nutrient-rich mud and decaying organic matter, aquatic weeds, lake-bottom sediment, perhaps even household waste if managed carefully, from the surrounding lake bed and canals. This incredibly fertile muck, the lifeblood of the Chinampa, would be scooped up perhaps using wooden spades or specialized long-handled scoops from a canoe and carefully deposited within the woven reed enclosure. You can imagine the rhythmic sloshing and plopping sounds as this rich dark mud was transferred layer by fragrant earthy layer. It probably wasn't the most glamorous job. Think mucking out a very large, very wet, but incredibly fertile compost bin. But it was absolutely essential. Alternating with layers of this rich mud, the farmer would add layers of aquatic vegetation like water, hyacinths, reeds, and other lake plants. These vegetative layers help to add bulk-improved drainage and aeration within the Chinampa. And as they decomposed, they would contribute further organic matter and nutrients to the soil. It was a kind of lasagna-making process, but with mud and weeds instead of pasta and cheese. And the end result was a super fertile agricultural plot. Instead of a delicious dinner, though delicious dinners would eventually come from it. This process of layering mud and vegetation would be repeated until the Chinampa rose about a meter or so, around 3 feet above the average water level of the lake or canal. The sides of the Chinampa might be further reinforced with more interwoven reeds, or even a kind of wattle fencing made from branches to prevent erosion and keep the precious soil from washing away. The aim was to create a stable, well-drained, yet constantly moist raised bed perfectly positioned to wick up water from the surrounding canals through capillary action, ensuring the crops would never go thirsty. There's a quirky little tidbit that suggests Chinampa builders might have had a specific, almost ritualistic way of layering the materials. Perhaps believing that certain combinations or sequences of mud and vegetation types would yield better results or even imbue the new land with a particular spirit or fertility. While not easily provable from archaeological evidence, such attention to detail and adherence to tradition would be entirely in keeping with the often ritualized nature of ancient Mesoamerican agriculture. Maybe there was a specific chant for good mud compaction, or a particular way to align the reeds for optimal cosmic energy flow. No, Juan, the water hyacinths go on top of the duckweed layer this lunar cycle, otherwise the maize spirits will be most displeased, and you know how they get. Historians still argue about the precise amount of labor and time required to construct a single Chinampa, and how frequently new ones needed to be built or existing ones significantly refurbished. Given their organic nature, Chinampas would require ongoing maintenance, reinforcing the edges, adding fresh layers of mud. But a well-built one could remain productive for many years, even generations. The sheer scale of the Chinampa system around Tenochtitlan suggests a highly organized and sustained effort of construction and upkeep, a testament to the Aztecs' engineering prowess and their long-term agricultural vision. The final touch, and a crucial one for the long-term stability and fertility of these woven islands, was the planting of those special ahuejote willow trees along their borders, which we will explore more closely very soon. But for now, picture that newly completed Chinampa, a long, narrow rectangle of dark, rich earth rising serenely from the shimmering water. Its sides still damp, its surface a pristine canvas, ready for the planting of seeds that would soon feed an empire. It was land literally conjured from the lake, a testament to the calm, patient, and deeply knowledgeable cultivation methods of the Aztec Chinamperos. You're now standing on the edge of a newly constructed Chinampa, that remarkable man-made island of fertile earth, woven and layered with such calm, meticulous care from the very fabric of the Aztec lake world. It's a marvel of sustainable engineering ready to burst forth with life. But before the first seeds are even sown, there's one more crucial element to add a living component that will provide stability, shade, and a host of other benefits to this watery farm. The ahuejote tree, a type of native willow that became the indispensable guardian and green anchor of the Chinampa system. These weren't just decorative trees, they were an integral living part of the Chinampa's architecture and ecology. As the Chinampa was being built, or shortly after its main structure of mud and vegetation was complete, young ahuejote, pronounced ahuejote, saplings or cuttings would be carefully planted along its edges, often at regular intervals. The Salix bonplandiana, as it's known botanically, is a species of willow native to Mexico and Central America, perfectly adapted to wet, marshy conditions. Its roots thrive in waterlogged soil, and this was key to its role in the Chinampa system. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Aztecs strategically planted ahuejote willow trees, Salix bonplandiana, along the borders of their Chinampas. These trees served multiple important functions, including stabilizing the edges of the artificial islands, with their extensive root systems providing shade, acting as windbreaks and yielding wood for tools and construction. Imagine these slender willow saplings being pushed into the still, soft earth at the Chinampas' perimeter. As they take root and grow, their dense, fibrous root systems would spread out, intertwining with the layered mud and decaying vegetation of the Chinampa itself and reaching down into the lake bed below. These roots acted like a natural form of living reinforcement, binding the loose soil together, preventing the edges of the Chinampa from eroding and collapsing into the surrounding canals due to wave action from passing canoes or the natural settling of the materials. They were in essence living retaining walls, constantly growing and strengthening their grip, ensuring the long-term integrity of these precious agricultural plots. It was a brilliantly sustainable solution. No need for imported stone or timber for revetments when you could grow your own living self-repairing ones. Much better than trying to get planning permission for a concrete retaining wall from the Tenochtitlan City Council, one imagines. But the benefits of the ahuejote trees didn't stop at structural support. As they grew taller, their leafy canopies would provide a measure of shade for the crops growing on the Chinampa, particularly during the hottest parts of the day. This could be crucial for more delicate seedlings or for plants that preferred less intense sunlight. The shade would also help to reduce water evaporation from the Chinampa's surface, conserving moisture. Furthermore, these rows of trees acted as effective windbreaks, protecting the tender crops from strong winds that could sweep across the open lake, especially during certain seasons. They created a more sheltered, stable microclimate on the surface of each garden island. The ahuejote trees also contributed to the fertility of the Chinampa. Their fallen leaves would decompose, adding valuable organic matter to the soil. And their roots, by aerating the underwater sections of the Chinampa and providing a complex habitat, likely encouraged the presence of beneficial microorganisms and aquatic life in the surrounding canals, all part of that intricate, self-sustaining ecosystem. Plus, the trees themselves yielded useful products. Willow wood is light and flexible, and it could be harvested for making tool handles, simple furniture, wattle for fencing or reinforcing, Chinampa edges, or even for fuel, though other sources were likely preferred for major fuel needs. It was a multitasking marvel of a tree perfectly suited to its role. You could say it was the Swiss Army knife of the Chinampa botanical world. It stabilized it, shaded it, sheltered, and it even provided a bit of raw material on the side. There's a quirky little tidbit that suggests the ahuejote trees might have also played a role in attracting beneficial insects or birds to the Chinampas. Their flowers could provide nectar for pollinators, and their branches could offer nesting sites for birds that might help control insect pests that could damage the crops. While perhaps not a primary reason for planting them, this kind of ecological synergy is often a feature of sophisticated traditional farming systems. It's like they were creating a little bed and breakfast for the helpful local wildlife with the rent paid and pest control services. Historians still argue about the precise density and management of these ahuejote plantings. Were they kept carefully pruned to specific heights to avoid overshading certain crops, or allowed to grow more freely? How often were they coppiced or pollarded for wood? And were there specific rituals or beliefs associated with the planting or felling of these important guardian trees? The details are sparse, but their ubiquitous presence in descriptions and depictions of Chinampas and their continued use in the surviving Chinampa zones like Xochimilco today underscores their vital importance. So as you picture that newly formed Chinampa, don't just see an island of mud. See it fringed with a line of young, graceful willow trees, their roots questing down into the dark waters, their leaves beginning to whisper in the gentle lake breeze. These weren't just trees, they were the living sinews of the Chinampa. The quiet green guardians of its fertility and its form, a testament to the Aztec understanding that the most enduring structures are often those built in partnership with nature itself. You are now looking at a beautifully formed Chinampa, its rectangular bed of rich earth rising from the lake. Its edges now secured and shaded by a line of young, resilient ahuejote willow trees. This man-made island is a testament to Aztec ingenuity, a perfect little agricultural paradise ready for planting. But even the most wonderfully constructed Chinampa with its layers of vegetation and mud needs a continuous supply of nutrients to maintain its extraordinary fertility and support multiple harvests year after year. And the Aztecs had a brilliantly simple, sustainable, and incredibly effective method. For this, they regularly dredged the rich organic mud from the bottom of the surrounding canals and spread it onto their garden beds. This lake's gift was the secret to the Chinampa's enduring productivity. Imagine the scene. A Chinampero, the Aztec farmer in his shallow canoe, or perhaps waiting in the canal beside his Chinampa if the water is not too deep. He's equipped with a specialized, long-handled wooden scoop, or a kind of net-like dredge. With practice movements, he reaches down into the dark, cool water and scoops up a load of the thick, black, incredibly fertile sediment that has accumulated at the bottom of the canal. This sediment is a rich cocktail of decomposed aquatic plants. Fish, waste, tiny organisms, and silt washed down from the surrounding lands. Basically prime, all-natural super compost delivered right to his watery doorstep. This is a mainstream historical fact. A crucial aspect of Chinampa agriculture was the regular dredging of nutrient-rich mud and decomposing organic matter from the bottom of the surrounding canals, which was then applied to the surface of the Chinampas, providing a continuous source of natural fertilizer and maintaining their high fertility. He then carefully transports this precious muck, perhaps in his canoe or in baskets, and spreads it evenly over the surface of his Chinampa. This wasn't just a casual dumping of mud. It was a careful application, ensuring the new layer was distributed where it was needed, most perhaps mixed with existing soil or used to build up areas that had settled. This process served multiple purposes. Firstly, and most obviously, it replenished the nutrients in the Chinampa soil that had been taken up by previous crops. It was a natural closed-loop fertilization system, far more effective and sustainable than relying on distant sources of manure or chemical fertilizers, which of course didn't exist then. The lake itself was constantly generating this rich organic material, and the Chinamperos were simply harvesting it and returning it to their fields. It's like having a self-refilling bag of the world's best organic fertilizer delivered free of charge right next to your garden. The only catch is you have to dredge it out of a canal yourself, which probably wasn't the most fragrant part of the job. Secondly, this regular addition of fresh mud helped to maintain the height of the Chinampa, counteracting the natural subsidence or compaction of the soil over time. It kept the garden beds well drained and at an optimal level above the water table. And thirdly, the act of dredging the canals themselves was vital for maintaining the health of the entire Chinampa system. It kept the waterways clear for canoe traffic, prevented them from silting up and becoming stagnant, and ensured a good flow of fresh, oxygenated water to the roots of the Chinampa plants and the ahuejote trees. It was a beautifully synergistic process. Tending the canals benefited the Chinampas, and tending the Chinampas by using the canal mud benefited the canals. You can imagine this being a regular, perhaps seasonal activity. After a major harvest or before planting a new crop, the Chinampero would dedicate time to this vital task of feeding his land. The scent of the freshly dredged mud, earthy, slightly fishy, rich with the smell of decomposition and life, would hang in the air, a perfume of fertility. It was hard work, no doubt, scooping and hauling that heavy, wet sediment, but the rewards were immense, extraordinarily fertile soil that could support almost continuous cultivation. There's a quirky little tidbit that suggests some Chinamperos might have developed a connoisseur's appreciation for different types of canal mud. Perhaps the mud from a canal shaded by certain types of trees was considered more potent, or the sediment from a deeper, slower-moving canal was prized for its particular texture or richness. They might have had their vintage mud spots, much like a modern gardener might seek out a specific type of well-rotted manure or artisanal compost. Ah, this mud from the North Canal near the old heronry, exquisite, full-bodied, with notes of decomposed water lily and a hint of philosophical tadpole. The chili peppers will adore it. Historians still argue about the precise frequency and intensity of this canal dredging and mud application. Was it a light top dressing several times a year, or a more substantial addition less frequently? Did different crops require different types or amounts of mud? And how was this labor organized? Was it an individual farmer's responsibility for his own plot? Or were there communal efforts for maintaining the main canals? The details likely varied. But the fundamental principle of using the lake's own bounty to perpetually renew the soil's fertility was central to the Chinampa system's incredible success. This constant replenishment meant that the Chinampas didn't suffer from the soil exhaustion that plagued many other agricultural systems. They remained incredibly productive year after year, decade after decade, capable of yielding multiple harvests, sometimes up to 7 different crops in a single year from the same plot, according to some early Spanish chroniclers, though that figure is sometimes debated for its accuracy. But even with more conservative estimates, their productivity was astounding. And it was all thanks to this calm, patient, and incredibly intelligent partnership with the lake, where the very waste of the aquatic ecosystem became the lifeblood of these astonishingly fertile man-made gardens. The gift of the lake delivered 1 scoop of rich mud at a time. You're now deeply appreciating the genius of the Aztec Chinampa system, particularly that clever, sustainable cycle of dredging rich canal mud to perpetually fertilize those man-made garden islands. The ahuejote willow trees stand as living anchors, their roots binding the precious soil, their leaves offering gentle shade. But the canals themselves, those shimmering liquid pathways snaking between the Chinampas, were far more than just convenient sources of fertilizer or ditches to define plot boundaries. They were the very lifelines of this unique agricultural landscape, playing a multitude of vital roles in irrigation, transportation, and the overall ecological health and serene beauty of the Chinampa zone. Imagine yourself once more in that gently gliding canoe, but this time your focus is on the water itself and the network of channels it forms. These canals weren't just accidental gaps between islands. They were an intentionally designed and carefully managed part of the entire system. They varied in width from narrow channels, just wide enough for a single canoe to pass, separating individual Chinampas, to broader thoroughfares that acted as main arteries for transport and water circulation throughout the district. This is a mainstream historical fact. The canals interwoven with the Aztec Chinampas were essential for the system's success, providing constant sub-irrigation to the raised fields through capillary action, as well as serving as primary routes for transportation of produce materials and people via canoe. The most crucial function of these canals was, of course, irrigation. The Chinampas were built so that their soil level was just slightly above the water table of the surrounding canals. This meant that moisture could be constantly wicked up into the fertile earth through capillary action, keeping the roots of the plants perfectly hydrated without ever becoming waterlogged. Thanks to the raised nature of the beds, or requiring complex, labor-intensive surface irrigation techniques, like carrying water in pots or digging ditches across the fields themselves, it was a natural, passive, and incredibly efficient self-watering system. The plants essentially drank as much as they needed directly from the watery veins that interlaced their garden beds. No sprinklers, no hoses, just the gentle, constant embrace of the lake. It's like having your houseplants sit in perfectly calibrated self-watering pots, but on a grand agricultural empire feeding scale. But the canals were also the highways of the Chinampa zone. In a landscape where solid ground was often at a premium, and pathways might be narrow or non-existent, canoes were the primary mode of transport. You would see Chinamperos poling or paddling their shallow draft canoes called acali, laden with freshly harvested maize beans, tomatoes, chilies, or vibrant bunches of flowers, gliding silently from their Chinampa plots to the local markets or to larger collection points for transport to the great market of Tlatelolco in the heart of Tenochtitlan. Building materials for new Chinampas, tools, household goods, people visiting neighbors, everything moved along these liquid roads. The canals facilitated a constant, gentle flow of commerce and communication, linking the individual garden islands into a cohesive, functioning community. It was probably a lot more peaceful than trying to navigate Roman rush hour traffic in a chariot, and definitely less risk of a wheel falling off. These waterways also played a vital role in the Chinampa ecosystem. They were home to fish amphibians like frogs and salamanders, such as the axolotl native to these lakes, aquatic insects, and waterfowl. This biodiversity contributed to the overall health of the system. Fish and other aquatic creatures would help to control insect larvae, and their waste products would add to the nutrient load of the canal bottom mud that was eventually dredged for fertilizer. The canals weren't sterile channels. They were living parts of the agricultural landscape, contributing to its fertility and resilience. You might see a kingfisher darting down to snatch a small fish, or ducks paddling contentedly among the reeds lining the canal banks, all part of this interconnected web of life. There's a quirky little tidbit that some Chinampa farmers might have actively farmed certain aquatic resources from their canals alongside their terrestrial crops. They might have encouraged the growth of edible aquatic plants, or set simple traps for fish or crayfish, or even harvested protein-rich algae like spirulina, known to the Aztecs as tequitlatl, which formed naturally on the surface of some alkaline lake waters. This would have further diversified their diet and made their agricultural system even more productive and self-sufficient. It's like having a built-in fish pond and vegetable patch all in one convenient watery location. Talk about a fully integrated home delivery system for your groceries. Historians still argue about the precise level of central planning versus organic community-level development in the layout and maintenance of the vast Chinampa canal networks, particularly in the areas supplying Tenochtitlan. Were the main canals engineered under imperial direction to optimize water flow and transport? Or did the system largely evolve through the cumulative efforts of generations of local farmers adapting to their specific hydrological conditions? It was likely a combination of both, with imperial oversight for major infrastructure and a great deal of local autonomy and expertise in managing the smaller interstitial waterways. The very presence of this intricate network of canals with their calm, reflective waters mirroring the sky and the lush greenery of the Chinampas would have contributed to the siren beauty and the unique atmosphere of the region. It was a landscape of extraordinary fertility, yes, but also one of profound peace, a place where the gentle rhythms of water and human labor blended in a harmonious, life-sustaining dance. These canals were truly the lifelines of abundance, the tranquil veins that carried nourishment, commerce, and a unique way of life through the heart of the Aztec world. You are now gliding peacefully along those life-giving Aztec canals, the water reflecting the sky, the lush Chinampas teeming with produce on either side. You've seen how these canals provided irrigation transport and a rich ecological balance. But the journey of a Chinampa crop didn't begin by simply scattering seeds onto the main garden bed. Oh no. The Aztecs, with their characteristic agricultural wisdom, employed a specialized and incredibly effective system for starting their plants, the almáciga, or seedling nursery bed. This was a dedicated, meticulously prepared space where tiny seeds were nurtured into strong, healthy young plants before being transplanted to their final positions on the Chinampa. Think of it as a sort of cozy 5-star preschool for baby vegetables and flowers, ensuring they got the very best start in life. The creation of an almáciga was an art in itself. The Chinampero would select a particularly well-protected and sunny spot, perhaps on a section of an existing Chinampa, or even on a specially constructed small platform. Here they would spread a thick, smooth layer of the finest, richest, most carefully sifted mud dredged from the bottom of the canals. That precious nutrient-packed lake gift we've already admired. This mud layer would be kept consistently moist and would serve as the perfect germination medium. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Aztecs utilized specialized seed beds, often referred to by the later Spanish term almáciga, derived from an Arabic word, where they would germinate seeds in a carefully prepared layer of rich mud before transplanting the resulting seedlings to the main Chinampa plots, a technique that allowed for higher germination rates and more efficient use of space and resources. Into this beautifully prepared bed of fine, damp mud, the farmer would press the precious seeds, maize beans, squash chilies, tomatoes, amaranth, or perhaps the vibrant cempasúchil marigold flowers so beloved for ceremonies. The seeds weren't just scattered randomly. They might be placed in neat rows or in small individual depressions, ensuring each one had adequate space and contact with the fertile mud. Sometimes the seeds were even pre-sprouted or soaked to encourage faster germination. It was a process undertaken with great care and attention to detail. You wouldn't just toss your valuable seeds to the wind and hope for the best. These were the future of your harvest, the sustenance of your family and your city. Once the seeds were sown, the almáciga would be kept consistently moist, perhaps by gently sprinkling water from the canals using a gourd dipper or by its natural proximity to the water table. It might also be covered with a light layer of reeds or woven mats to protect the delicate seeds from harsh sun, heavy rain, or hungry birds until they had successfully germinated and put down their first tender roots. It was a little plant nursery, a safe haven where the vulnerable seedlings could gather their strength before facing the wider world of the main Chinampa. You can almost picture a tiny, determined Aztec sprout pushing its way through the dark, rich mud, thinking, "Right then, this mud spa is lovely, but I'm ready for the big leagues of Chinampa number 3, Section B." This system of using seedling beds offered several significant advantages. Firstly, it maximized germination rates. By providing a perfect, consistently moist and nutrient-rich environment, free from competition from weeds, a higher percentage of seeds would successfully sprout. Secondly, it allowed for a much more efficient use of the main Chinampa space. While the seedlings were growing in their compact nursery, the main beds could be occupied by another maturing crop or be undergoing preparation with a fresh layer of canal mud. It enabled a kind of intensive sequential cropping that contributed to the Chinampa's legendary productivity. Thirdly, it allowed the farmer to select only the strongest, healthiest seedlings for transplanting, ensuring a more robust and productive final crop. Any weak or struggling seedlings could be culled at this early stage. It was like an agricultural boot camp, only the best recruits made it to the main field. There's a quirky little tidbit that suggests some Chinampa farmers might have sung or talked to their seeds in the Almaciga, much like some were rumored to do with their cacao trees. They might have whispered encouragements or ancient chants, believing it would help the seeds to awaken and grow strong. While this is more in the realm of folklore, it reflects a deep connection and a sense of partnership with the plant world. A belief that human intention and care could influence the vitality of their crops, even at this very early stage. Grow strong little tomato babies. Caesar salad depends on you? Okay, maybe not Caesar, wrong empire, but you get the idea of the affectionate encouragement. Historians still argue about the precise range of crops that were exclusively started in Almacigas versus those that might have been direct sown onto the Chinampas, and how these practices might have varied seasonally or by specific crop requirements. For delicate or valuable seeds like perhaps certain varieties of chili or medicinal herbs, the use of a protected seedling bed would have been almost essential. For hardier, larger seeded crops like some bean or squash, direct sowing might have been more common though. Starting even these in an Almaciga could still offer benefits in terms of crop timing and density. Once the seedlings in the Almaciga had reached a suitable size, with a few true leaves and a sturdy little root system, they would be carefully lifted often with a small clod of the nursery mud still attached to their roots to minimize transplant shock, and then meticulously transplanted into their designated spots on the main Chinampa. This transplanting process itself would be done with care, ensuring correct spacing and depth. Another example of the calm, patient, and highly skilled labor that characterized Chinampa cultivation. The Almaciga was the crucial first chapter in the life story of a Chinampa plant, a sheltered beginning that set the stage for future abundance. You've just seen the tender beginnings of Chinampa life with tiny seeds germinating in the rich, protective mud of the Almaciga, those carefully tended seedling nurseries. Once these young plants were strong enough, they were transplanted with meticulous care to the main Chinampa beds, those fertile man-made islands rising from the lake. And it is here on these verdant platforms that the Aztecs practiced a wonderfully harmonious and highly productive system of polyculture, often growing a diverse array of crops together in a way that benefited both the plants and the soil. This wasn't monoculture farming as we often see today. It was a calm, carefully considered companion, planting a symphony of species working together. Imagine yourself standing on a mature Chinampa, the dark, rich soil moist beneath your feet. All around you is a vibrant tapestry of growing things. The three sisters, maize, beans, and squash, formed the cornerstone of Mesoamerican agriculture, and they were perfectly at home on the Chinampas. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Aztecs, like many Mesoamerican cultures, practiced polyculture on their Chinampas, frequently intercropping maize, beans, and squash. The three sisters, in a symbiotic system along with other vital crops like chilies, tomatoes, amaranth, and various flowers. This diversity enhanced soil fertility and pest resistance. The genius of the Three Sisters system lies in its synergy. The tall, sturdy maize stalks provide a natural trellis for the climbing beans to ascend towards the sunlight. The beans, in turn, being legumes, fix nitrogen in the soil, enriching it for the benefit of all three crops, particularly the nutrient-hungry maize. And the broad, sprawling leaves of the squash plants spread out across the ground, acting as a living mulch, shading the soil, conserving moisture, and suppressing weed growth. It was a perfectly balanced, self-supporting community of plants, a testament to generations of agricultural observation and wisdom. You could almost picture them having little plant committee meetings. All right, Beans, you handle nitrogen fixing this week. Squash your on weed control and ground-level humidity. Mace, just try to stay upright and don't cast too much shade on the tomatoes, they get terribly diva-ish. But it wasn't just the three sisters. The Chinampas were also home to a dazzling variety of other plants. Tomatoes in many different shapes and colors, the Aztecs cultivated several varieties long before they became a staple in Italian cuisine would be ripening on their vines. Chili peppers from mild to fiercely hot would add their vibrant hues and pungent flavors to the mix. Amaranth, a highly nutritious grain with beautiful plume-like flowers, was another important crop, its seeds used for food, and its leaves sometimes eaten as greens. And then there were the flowers. Oh, the flowers. The Aztecs had a deep love for flowers, using them extensively in ceremonies as offerings to the gods for personal adornment and for their sheer beauty and fragrance. Chinampas were often ablaze with the brilliant orange and yellow of Cempasúchil Aztec marigolds, the flower of the dead, still vital in Day of the Dead celebrations, but also dahlias, the national flower of Mexico. Sunflowers and perhaps even certain types of orchids or other fragrant blossoms. These weren't just for show, flowers attracted pollinators which benefited the food crops, and some flowers were also edible or had medicinal uses. The planting on a Chinampa was a continuous calm process, not a single frantic sowing season. Because of the constant moisture and incredible fertility of the soil replenished by that rich canal mud, crops could be grown year-round. As one crop was harvested, another would be planted in its place, or seedlings from the almáciga would be transplanted. This intensive successional planting allowed for an almost unbelievable level of productivity. You might see a patch of mature maize ready for harvest right next to a section where young bean seedlings are just emerging, and another area being prepared with fresh mud for a new planting of tomatoes. It was a dynamic, ever-changing mosaic of growth. There's a quirky little tidbit that suggests some Chinamperos might have used specific, almost ritualistic planting patterns or orientations for their crops, believing it could influence their growth, protect them from pests, or align them with favorable cosmic energies. Perhaps they consulted agricultural almanacs or priestly advice on the most auspicious times and arrangements for planting certain combinations of crops. While direct evidence for this on a day-to-day level is hard to come by, the deep integration of religion and daily life in Aztec culture makes such a practice entirely plausible. It's like ancient feng shui, but for your floating vegetable patch, ensuring your chili peppers had good vibes and your maize wasn't misaligned with the god of abundant harvests. Historians still argue about the precise yields and the exact number of harvests per year that were achievable on the Chinampas. Some early Spanish chroniclers, astounded by the system's productivity, reported up to 7 harvests a year for certain crops. Modern scholars are sometimes more conservative in their estimates, suggesting perhaps 2 to 4 major crop cycles depending on the specific plants and management techniques. However, even with the more conservative figures, the Chinampas were far more productive per unit of land than most contemporary European agricultural systems, or indeed many modern ones. This calm, harmonious planting of diverse crops, this constant cycle of sowing, tending, and harvesting, transformed the Chinampas into veritable engines of abundance. They were a testament to the Aztecs' deep understanding of plant synergies, soil fertility, and the gentle, persistent rhythms of nature, all cleverly harnessed within their unique man-made islands of green. You're now standing amidst the lush, vibrant greenery of an Aztec Chinampa, having witnessed the calm, harmonious planting of diverse crops. The three sisters, intertwined chilies, blushing red tomatoes, ripening, and flowers bursting in a riot of color. This careful polyculture, combined with the incredible fertility of the soil, constantly replenished by canal mud, and the perfect irrigation provided by the surrounding waterways, all contributed to one of the most astonishing features of the Chinampa system: its almost unbelievable year-round productivity. These weren't just pretty floating gardens, they were agricultural powerhouses capable of yielding a constant bounty that fed one of the largest cities in the world at the time. The magic of the Chinampa lay in its ability to support almost continuous cultivation. Unlike rain-fed agriculture in many other regions, which was often limited to 1 or perhaps 2 growing seasons per year, dictated by rainfall patterns, the Chinampas, with their built-in irrigation and constantly renewed soil fertility, could produce crop after crop all year long. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Aztec Chinampa system was renowned for its exceptionally high agricultural yields, capable of producing multiple harvests per year. Some sources suggest up to 7 for certain crops. Though 2-4 is more commonly accepted by modern scholars as an average for major staples, which was crucial for sustaining the large urban population of Tenochtitlan. It was a model of intensive yet sustainable food production. Imagine the scene throughout the changing seasons, or rather the less dramatically changing wet and dry seasons of the High Valley of Mexico. Even as one crop was maturing and ready for harvest, seedlings of the next crop would already be thriving in the nearby Almáciga, those special nursery beds ready for transplanting. There was little downtime for the fertile Chinampa soil. As soon as a patch was cleared, it would be prepared with a fresh layer of that nutrient-rich canal mud, and new plants would be put in. This rapid succession planting meant that there was always something growing, always something nearing ripeness, always a harvest just around the corner. It was like a perfectly choreographed agricultural ballet with different plants taking their turn on the fertile stage in a continuous year-round performance. The Chinampas didn't really do fallow seasons. Their idea of a holiday was probably just a slightly lighter planting schedule for a week or two. This constant bounty was a marvel to the Spanish conquistadors when they first arrived in Tenochtitlan. They wrote with astonishment about the abundance and variety of fresh food available in the city's great market at Tlatelolco, much of it supplied by the Chinampa zones that surrounded the capital like a vast green lacework. They saw canoes arriving daily, laden with maize beans, squash chilies, tomatoes, amaranth, and a profusion of flowers and herbs. This level of productivity, particularly of fresh vegetables and flowers, was something quite unfamiliar to many Europeans of the time whose own agriculture was often more seasonal and less intensive. It was clear that the Aztecs had cracked the code for high-yield sustainable farming in their unique lacustrine environment. The key to this was not just the fertile mud and constant water, but also the meticulous management by the Chinamperos. They understood the needs of their different crops, the best times for planting and harvesting each one, and how to make the most of their limited but incredibly precious man-made land. They might intercrop quick-growing vegetables like radishes, though radishes are post-conquest, imagine. A similar quick native root crop or leafy greens between slower maturing maize plants, getting an extra harvest from the same space. They would carefully weed and tend their plots, ensuring the crops received maximum sunlight and nutrients. It was labor-intensive, yes, but the rewards were evident in the overflowing baskets of produce. There's a quirky little tidbit that suggests the Chinampas were so productive and the transport via canal so efficient that the cost of fresh vegetables in Tenochtitlan's market was often surprisingly low, making a relatively diverse and healthy diet accessible to a significant portion of the urban population, not just the elites. While maize was the staple, the abundance of fresh produce from the Chinampas added vital nutrients and variety. It was like having a massive, incredibly efficient local farmers market operating 365 days a year with very short supply chains. Your food miles were more like food paddle strokes. Historians still argue about the precise caloric contribution of the Chinampa system to the overall diet of Tenochtitlan's inhabitants, and how it compared to food brought in as tribute from conquered provinces further afield. Calculating exact agricultural yields from centuries ago is a complex business, relying on interpreting historical accounts, archaeological evidence, and modern analogs. However, there is a general consensus that the Chinampas were exceptionally productive and played an absolutely critical role in the food security of the Aztec capital, particularly for perishable goods like fresh vegetables and flowers, which were harder to transport over long distances. This ability to produce food year-round, this constant cycle of planting and harvesting, gave the Chinampa zones an atmosphere of perpetual abundance and gentle, unceasing activity. It was a landscape that was always alive, always green, always offering up its gifts. This reliable bounty, born from the calm, meticulous, and deeply knowledgeable cultivation methods of the Aztec farmers, was the quiet miracle that underpinned the grandeur and power of their magnificent city on the lake. The floating gardens weren't just floating, they were overflowing. You are now deeply immersed in the productive wonder of the Aztec Chinampas, those man-made islands of fertility that yielded a constant bounty year after year, feeding the heart of a mighty empire. You've seen the harmonious intercropping of maize beans and squash, the vibrant hues of chilies and tomatoes, and the dazzling displays of flowers. But the Chinampas were far more than just exceptionally efficient vegetable patches or flower gardens. These floating isles, with their intricate network of canals and their lush vegetation, created a unique and incredibly rich ecosystem, a vibrant haven for a diverse array of wildlife. Birds, fish, amphibians, insects, all thriving alongside the cultivated crops. They weren't just agricultural zones, they were miniature man-made wetlands bustling with natural life. Imagine yourself pausing in your canoe, the gentle lapping of water against the hull the only sound for a moment. As you look around, you begin to notice the sheer biodiversity that the Chinampa system supported. The canals themselves, far from being sterile ditches, would be teeming with life. Small fish, perhaps species native to the lake system, like various types of goodies or poetalides, would dart through the clear or murky waters, finding shelter among the submerged roots of the awehoda willow trees that lined the Chinampa edges. These fish weren't just picturesque. They played a role in the ecosystem, perhaps feeding on insect larvae, and contributing their own waste to the nutrient-rich mud that would eventually be dredged for fertilizer. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Chinampa system, with its network of canals and diverse vegetation, created a rich aquatic and semi-aquatic habitat that supported a variety of local wildlife, including fish, amphibians, waterfowl, and insects, contributing to the overall ecological balance and productivity of the region. Amphibians would also be abundant. Frogs would fill the evenings with their chorus, their tadpoles thriving in the shallow, weedy edges of the canals. And perhaps most famously, the unique and rather endearing axolotl Ambystoma mexicanum, that neotenic salamander with its feathery external gills that spends its entire life in water, would have found a perfect home in the Chinampa waterways. These creatures, now critically endangered in the wild, were once common in the lakes of Xochimilco and Chalco, and were even a source of food for the Aztecs. They are a living link to that ancient aquatic world. Spotting an axolotl serenely paddling in a Chinampa canal would be like glimpsing a little pink frilly water dragon, a whimsical inhabitant of these man-made Edens. The air above and around the Chinampas would be alive with birds. Various species of waterfowl, ducks, coots, grebes, would paddle in the canals or nest among the reeds. Herons and egrets, elegant and patient, would stalk fish and frogs along the water's edge. Kingfishers, like flashes of iridescent blue, might dive for small prey. And a multitude of smaller songbirds would find food and shelter among the crops and the willow trees, their songs adding to the tranquil atmosphere. These birds weren't just pretty, they also played a role in insect control, and their droppings would further enrich the Chinampa soil. It was a natural, self-regulating system where every creature, great and small, had its part to play. It was probably a birdwatcher's paradise, though the Aztecs were likely more interested in the birds that were good to eat, or whose feathers could be used for their spectacular ceremonial attire. Insects, too, would be a vital part of this ecosystem. Bees, butterflies, and other pollinators would be drawn to the abundance of flowers grown on the Chinampas, the marigolds, dahlias, and perhaps even the blossoms of the squash and bean plants, ensuring good fruit set for the crops. Dragonflies and damselflies would skim over the canals, their larvae nymphs developing in the water and preying on mosquito larvae. While some insects were undoubtedly pests, the overall biodiversity likely helped to keep any single pest species from becoming too dominant. It was a complex web of interactions, a far cry from the often sterile monocultures of some modern agricultural systems. There's a quirky little tidbit that the Aztecs may have even actively farmed certain insects or aquatic creatures within the Chinampa system. For instance, they consumed a type of waterfly larvae or eggs known as ahuautli or Mexican caviar, which was collected from the surface of the lakes. The calm, nutrient-rich waters of the Chinampa canals might have provided ideal conditions for these and other edible aquatic morsels. So your Chinampa wasn't just growing vegetables. It was a multi-level food production unit, yielding crops from the soil fish from the water and perhaps even a few crunchy, protein-rich insect snacks if you were feeling adventurous. Don't knock it till you've tried it, as they probably didn't say back in Tenochtitlan. Historians still argue about the degree to which the Aztecs consciously managed the Chinampa ecosystem to enhance this biodiversity for agricultural benefit, versus the rich wildlife being a more incidental, though welcome byproduct of creating such a fertile and water-rich environment. Were they deliberately creating habitats for beneficial birds or fish? Or did these creatures simply move in because it was such a great place to live? It was likely a combination of both intentional encouragement and natural colonization. What is clear is that these floating isles were far from being isolated, sterile plots. They were vibrant living ecosystems where cultivated crops, native plants, and a diverse array of animal life coexisted in a dynamic, mutually supportive balance. The calm cultivation methods of the Chinampas didn't just produce food. They created a thriving natural haven in the midst of a vast urban center, a testament to an agricultural system that understood the profound value of working in harmony with nature, not against it. You're now deeply immersed in the daily life of an Aztec Chinampero, experiencing the peaceful, rhythmic toil of tending those remarkably fertile man-made islands. You've seen the calm planting of companion crops, the constant renewal of the soil with rich canal mud, and the vibrant ecosystem that thrived in this unique agricultural landscape. But for the Aztecs, like for many ancient agricultural societies, farming wasn't just a practical means of producing food. It was also a sacred act, deeply intertwined with their religious beliefs, their cosmology, and their relationship with a pantheon of powerful deities who governed the natural world. The fertile soil of the Chinampas was not just earth and mud. It was sacred ground, and its bounty was seen as a gift from the gods, a gift that required reciprocal offerings, rituals, and a profound sense of reverence. Imagine the Chinampero at the beginning of a planting cycle, or perhaps at the time of a crucial harvest, pausing in his work. He might turn his gaze towards one of the towering temple pyramids visible in the distance across the lake in Tenochtitlan, or perhaps towards a smaller local shrine dedicated to an agricultural deity. In his heart, or perhaps through quiet words or gestures, he would be acknowledging the divine forces that made his Chinampa flourish. This is a mainstream historical fact. Aztec agriculture was deeply embedded in their religious worldview, with numerous deities associated with maize, rain fertility, and the earth and agricultural cycles were marked by specific ceremonies, offerings, and rituals intended to ensure bountiful harvest and appease the gods. The most important agricultural deity was probably Chicomacoatl, Seven Serpent, the goddess of maize and sustenance, often depicted carrying ears of corn or a ceremonial staff. Farmers would have made offerings to her to ensure a good maize crop, the staple of their diet. Then there was Tlaloc, the powerful goggle-eyed god of rainstorms and fertility, whose favor was absolutely essential for any successful agriculture, even in the water-rich environment of the Chinampas. Too little rain could affect the lake levels. Too much could bring devastating floods. Appeasing Tlaloc with offerings and ceremonies was a constant concern. You can almost picture a Chinampa farmer anxiously scanning the skies during a dry spell, muttering a quick prayer to Tlaloc, perhaps promising him an extra plump chili pepper from the upcoming harvest if he'd just send a little life-giving shower. "Come on, Tlaloc, old boy." He might think, "Don't make me have to resort to interpretive dance here. My knees aren't what they used to be." Saiptotec. Our Lord the Flayed One was another complex deity associated with agricultural renewal. The cycle of death and rebirth in nature, like a seed dying to sprout new life and the spring season. Rituals dedicated to him, though rather grim to our modern sensibilities, often involving priests wearing the flayed skins of sacrificial victims, were seen as essential for ensuring the Earth's continued fertility. While the direct link to everyday Chinampa practice might seem distant, the underlying concept of sacrifice and renewal being necessary for abundance permeated Aztec thought. It's highly likely that individual Chinampa farmers or communities of farmers perform smaller, more personal rituals directly on or near their garden islands. They might have made offerings of flowers. Those vibrant Sempasachil marigolds, for instance, which were strongly associated with rituals for the dead, but also with the sun and life. Or burned copal incense, its fragrant smoke carrying their prayers to the gods. Small clay figurines of fertility deities might have been placed among the crop's silent guardians watching over the growing plants. Perhaps specific chants or songs were associated with planting different crops or with the dredging of that sacred canal mud, imbuing these practical tasks with spiritual significance. There's a quirky little tidbit that suggests the Aztecs may have believed that certain plants themselves possessed a kind of spirit or consciousness. For example, they revered Amaranth huautli not just as a nutritious grain, but also as a sacred plant, sometimes using its ground seeds mixed with honey or even human blood. in certain priestly rituals not typically by farmers to fashion images of their gods, which were then consumed in a form of ritual communion. While this specific practice was more for grand temple ceremonies, the underlying reverence for the spiritual power inherent in plants would have undoubtedly extended to the everyday crops grown on the Chinampas. Your maize wasn't just maize. It was a gift from Chicomecoat, a manifestation of her life-giving power. You didn't just harvest it, you received it with gratitude. Historians still argue about the exact nature and prevalence of localized folk religious practices among common Aztec Chinampa farmers, as opposed to the more grand state-sponsored temple rituals. How much autonomy did individual farmers have in their personal religious observances related to their plots? And were there specific deities or spirits associated uniquely with the Chinampas themselves? Beyond the major agricultural gods, surviving sources tend to focus more on the state religion, but the daily interactions with the fertile earth and the life-giving water must have fostered a deep personal spirituality among those who worked these incredible gardens. The very act of creating new land from the lake of coaxing such incredible abundance from mud and water could have been seen as a sacred act of mimesis mirroring the gods' own acts of creation. The Chinampa was a microcosm of the ordered world, a fertile space carved out from the primordial waters, maintained through human labor and divine favor. Every successful harvest was a reaffirmation of this sacred partnership. So, as the Chinampero calmly tended his crops, his actions were more than just farming. They were a form of prayer, a continuous dialogue with the earth, the water, and the divine forces that sustain them all. You are now deeply immersed in the serene yet sacred world of the Aztec Chinampa farmer. Understanding that their calm cultivation methods were underpinned by a profound spiritual connection to the land, the water, and the gods of fertility and sustenance. You've seen the meticulous construction of these man-made islands, the constant renewal of their soil with rich canal mud, the harmonious intercropping of diverse plants, and the almost unbelievable year-round bounty they produced. Now let's zoom out from the individual Chinampa plot and consider the collective impact of this remarkable agricultural system. For these floating gardens, these tranquil green veins running through the watery heart of the Valley of Mexico were nothing less than the verdant pantry that fed an empire sustaining the vast and hungry population of the magnificent Aztec capital Tenochtitlan. Imagine Tenochtitlan in its heyday around the early 16th century, just before the arrival of the Spanish. It was one of the largest and most impressive cities in the world. At the time, a bustling metropolis built on an island in Lake Texcoco, connected to the mainland by massive causeways. Its population, including that of its sister city Tlatelolco, may have numbered anywhere from 200,000 to perhaps even 300,000 people or more. A truly staggering figure for a pre-industrial city. Feeding such a dense urban concentration, especially in an environment with limited, easily arable land, was a monumental challenge. And the Chinampa system was the Aztecs' ingenious and largely successful answer to this challenge. This is a mainstream historical fact. The highly productive Chinampa agricultural system surrounding Tenochtitlan played a crucial role in providing the vast quantities of fresh food, particularly maize beans, squash chilies, tomatoes, and flowers, necessary to sustain the large and dense population of the Aztec capital and its satellite communities. Vast areas of the shallow freshwater lakes of Xochimilco and Chalco to the south of Tenochtitlan were transformed into an intricate lacework of Chinampas and canals, a sprawling agricultural zone dedicated to provisioning the city. From your vantage point in a canoe, you would see an almost endless vista of these fertile garden plots, each one meticulously tended, each one contributing its share to the imperial larder. The sheer scale of it would be breathtaking, a testament to generations of labor and sophisticated hydraulic engineering. It was like a massive, incredibly efficient, and stunningly beautiful floating supermarket produce section stretching for miles. The productivity of the Chinampas, as we've discussed, was extraordinary. With their constantly replenished soil fertility and year-round irrigation, they could yield multiple harvests annually. This meant a steady, reliable supply of fresh food for the city's inhabitants. While maize, the sacred staple, was undoubtedly a primary crop, the Chinampas also produced a rich diversity of other vegetables and fruits: beans, squash tomatoes, various types of chili peppers, amaranth, chia seeds, avocados. though avocados were likely grown more on terraced hillsides. Their products would come through the same markets and sweet potatoes. This variety contributed to a relatively well-rounded diet for many, at least when supplemented with protein from hunted game, domesticated turkeys, and dogs. Yes, dogs were a food source and aquatic resources from the lakes themselves, like fish frogs, waterfowl, and even that Mexican caviar, the ahuatl insect eggs. The network of canals that interlaced the Chinampa zones was not just for irrigation. It was the vital transport system that carried this bounty to the city. Day after day, you would see a constant procession of canoes poled or paddled by Chinamperos laden high with freshly harvested produce, gliding silently along the waterways towards the great market at Tlatelolco or to smaller neighborhood markets within Tenochtitlan. Imagine the scene at the market, a vibrant, noisy, colorful explosion of sights, sounds, and smells, with mountains of fresh vegetables, fragrant herbs, and dazzling flowers. Much of it brought in that very morning from the nearby Chinampas. It was the ultimate farm-to-table experience Aztec style with very few food miles involved. The freshness and abundance must have been remarkable. Get your sun-ripened tomatoes here so fresh they still think they're on the Chinampa. And don't forget your ceremonial marigolds wouldn't want to upset the ancestors, would we? Flowers, as we've noted, were a hugely important Chinampa crop, not just for their beauty, but for their deep religious and ceremonial significance in Aztec culture. They were used as offerings in temples to adorn statues of gods, to decorate homes and palaces during festivals, and to be worn as personal adornments by nobles and warriors. The Chinampas supplied a seemingly endless profusion of these blooms, making Tenochtitlan a city filled with fragrance and vibrant color. Historians still argue about the precise percentage of Tenochtitlan's total food supply that came directly from the Chinampa system, versus the amount procured through tribute from conquered provinces, which could be hundreds of miles away. The Aztec Empire was vast, and tribute, in the form of maize beans and other foodstuffs, certainly flowed into the capital from these subjugated regions. However, for perishable items like fresh green vegetables, delicate fruits, and flowers, the nearby Chinampas would have been the indispensable primary source. They provided the daily freshness that a long-distance tribute system reliant on human porters simply could not match. The calm, meticulous, and incredibly productive cultivation methods of the Chinampas were therefore the silent green engine that powered much of the daily life and ritual splendor of the Aztec capital. They were a triumph of human ingenuity, a sustainable agricultural marvel that allowed a great civilization to flourish in a challenging, watery environment. Without the constant, reliable bounty of these floating gardens, the story of Tenochtitlan, and indeed of the Aztec Empire itself, might have been very different. They were quite literally feeding the heart of an empire one serenely cultivated, mud-replenished, flower-bedecked island at a time. You have journeyed with us through the serene, water-laced world of the Aztec Chinampas, witnessing their calm, ingenious construction, the harmonious planting of their diverse crops, the sacred beliefs that underpin their cultivation, and their vital role in feeding the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan. From the first layering of mud and reeds to the final bountiful harvest gliding along the canals, the Chinampa system was a masterpiece of sustainable agriculture, a testament to a profound understanding of ecological balance. But what became of these floating gardens after the fall of the Aztec Empire? And does their ancient wisdom still hold any lessons for us today as our sleepy exploration draws to its gentle close? Let's look at the enduring, if sometimes fragile, green legacy of Xochimilco and the timeless relevance of Chinampa cultivation. The Spanish conquest in the early 16th century brought cataclysmic changes to the Valley of Mexico. Tenochtitlan was razed, and Mexico City began to rise from its ruins, built upon a different vision, a European model of urban development. The intricate lake system, once the lifeblood of the Aztec capital, and its Chinampa agriculture was gradually drained over centuries to control flooding and create more land for the expanding colonial city. This drainage had a devastating impact on the Chinampa zones. As the water levels dropped and canals dried up, many of these incredibly fertile garden islands were lost, reverting to dry land or becoming absorbed into the urban fabric. This is a mainstream historical fact. Following the Spanish conquest and the subsequent draining of the lakes in the Valley of Mexico to control flooding and expand Mexico City, the vast majority of the ancient Chinampa agricultural system was lost, though a significant remnant still survives today in Xochimilco, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. However, remarkably, not all was lost. In the southern reaches of what was once Lake Xochimilco, a significant portion of the Chinampa system survived, and indeed continues to be cultivated to this day. Xochimilco, now a borough of Mexico City, is famous for its picturesque canals and its still functioning Chinampas. If you visit today, you can take a ride on a brightly decorated trajinera, a flat-bottomed boat similar to the ancient Aztec canoes, but much more colorful and often equipped with a table and chairs for tourists gliding through the same ancient waterways that once carried maize and flowers to the Aztec emperors. It's a living, breathing link to that pre-Columbian past, a vibrant echo of Tenochtitlan's watery heart. The farmers there, still sometimes called Chinamperos, continue to use many of the traditional techniques, dredging mud from the canals to fertilize their plots, growing a diverse array of vegetables and famously flowers, particularly for Mexico City's markets. The modern Chinampas of Xochimilco face numerous challenges, of course. Urban encroachment, water pollution from the surrounding city, changes in the water table, and economic pressures all threaten their continued existence. Yet there is a growing recognition, both within Mexico and internationally, of the immense historical, cultural, and ecological value of this ancient agricultural system. Efforts are underway to preserve and revitalize the Chinampas, to promote their sustainable farming practices, and to educate people about their importance. It's like an ancient, incredibly clever piece of software for sustainable living that we almost let get deleted, and now we're frantically trying to recover the files. There's a quirky and rather hopeful tidbit that some modern chefs and proponents of the slow food and locavore movements are now looking to the Chinampas of Xochimilco as a source of high-quality, sustainably grown local produce for Mexico City's restaurants and markets. There's a renewed appreciation for the unique flavors and traditional crop varieties that can be cultivated there, and a recognition that this ancient system offers valuable lessons for modern urban agriculture and food security. Imagine a trendy Mexico City restaurant proudly advertising heirloom tomatoes and Aztec broccoli, freshly harvested this morning from our partner Chinampa in Xochimilco. It's a delicious way of keeping the legacy alive. Historians still argue about the exact degree of continuity between ancient Aztec Chinampa practices and those seen in Xochimilco today. How much knowledge was lost and then perhaps reinvented, and how much represents an unbroken tradition passed down through nearly 5 centuries of immense societal change? It's a complex question, but the fundamental principles, the raised beds, the canals, the use of lake mud, the polyculture, clearly demonstrate a profound and enduring connection to that ancient wisdom. The calm cultivation methods of the Aztec Chinampas offer timeless lessons for us in our own often environmentally stressed modern world. They demonstrate the power of working in harmony with natural systems rather than against them. They showcase the benefits of biodiversity, closed-loop nutrient cycling, and water conservation. They remind us that intensive agriculture doesn't have to be destructive. It can be regenerative and beautiful. In an age of concerns about climate change, soil degradation, and the sustainability of our global food supply, the ingenious, serene, and highly productive floating gardens of the Aztecs feel more relevant and inspiring than ever. They are not just a relic of the past, but a potential blueprint for a greener, more harmonious future. And so, as we gently pole our imaginary canoe away from the last of these verdant, water-laced gardens, the image of the Aztec Chinampero calmly tending his fertile island remains a powerful symbol of human ingenuity and ecological wisdom. The gentle pulse of the Chinampas, that quiet rhythm of growth and renewal, has resonated through centuries, a testament to a truly remarkable way of life. The shimmering canals of Xochimilco, with their flower-laden trajineras and their ancient enduring garden islands, now begin to fade into the soft twilight of your mind. The scent of damp earth, of blooming marigolds, and the distant echo of an Aztec drum all dissolve into the peaceful quiet of your surroundings. Let the calm, meticulous spirit of the Chinampa farmer infuse your own sense of tranquility as you prepare for sleep. The wisdom of these ancient cultivators, their ability to create such abundance in harmony with nature, is a soothing thought, a reminder of the gentle, life-giving rhythms that underpin our world. The need to plant, to dredge, to harvest can now rest. The cycle is complete, and a deep, untroubled slumber awaits you as fertile and as peaceful as those ancient floating gardens of the Aztec world.